is that? Is that a crane? Happy little crane resting on the back of that truck? Yeah, I'm talking to you. Here's our destination, Woodlawn Cemetery. That's interesting, they've got like a Hollywood sign over there. We're in the town of Gotha, or Gotha. And here we are. Front entrance protected by lions. We have been here before to this cemetery. We have visited the person that we're going to visit today before. Just because we visited them once before doesn't mean we can't come say hi and pay our respects again. Especially for this one, for this guy. Maybe nobody more beloved than this person, other than maybe Mr. Rogers, and they are both stars of the public broadcasting channel. I'm going to visit Bob Ross.
Today I'm going to use the oval brush, and I'm going to mix up each side. There we go. That oval brush makes it look like there's thousands of little leaves on those rascals. Super for that, and I'm just barely tapping.
And the last time I was out here, he had a lot of stuff that fans had left on his gravesite, so it made it kind of easy to find. So you can kind of see the main steeple and everything there. We're like directly behind it, and there's a big praying hand statue over there. Bob's grave is right over here with just tons of stuff on it. Here it is. Last time I was here, people actually were leaving full-on paintings on easels that they had painted for him. What a headstone, huh? The great Bob Ross. October 29th, 1942. He passed away of lymphoma, cancer, July 4th, 1995. See a can with his image on it, and all kinds of happy little trees. It says happy little clouds. People leaving paintbrushes. I love you. This is great to see. He gets a lot of love out here. Even his image on the rock. Peapod, his famous squirrel that was always in his pocket. Or paintbrushes, a rock that says Ross. And even a little painting someone made of Bob. That's great. I'm going to position it here just because I think it probably blew over. For many people, they would have never even gotten into painting if it weren't for Bob Ross, which is kind of crazy considering that was his second career in his life. He actually, you know, his mother was really into nature when he was a boy, and his father was a carpenter, so that kind of shows the love of creating things and his love of nature and animals. He ended up going into the military when he was 18, and he basically was a clerk and did that until he retired. He had a wife very briefly and had a son with her, Steve, who would be featured on his painting shows. But Bob basically, after or right towards the end of his military career, they sent him out to Alaska, and he and Steve moved out to Alaska. Bob had recently married Jane, who would be the love of his life, and they all went out to Alaska together. And Bob, when he retired, he took a bartending job, or when his military career was over, he took a bartending job and also took up painting and was painting gold pans and selling them in the bar up in Alaska. Bob would always give credit to Alaska for his love of the mountains and the painting that kind of scenery, the stuff that he painted. But he basically fell in love with, he saw a guy named Bill Alexander on TV, and he really loved this guy's painting style, And he basically was doing what Bob Ross did before Bob was doing it. So Bob took his class and became one of the certified instructors and ended up quitting the bar job and accepted a job where he would tour around teaching the Bill Alexander method. Now, when he did that, Bill had decided to retire. And so a woman named Annette Kowalski wanted to take Bill's class because she was a fan of Bill. She had recently lost a child, and she was in a deep depression, and she was kind of bummed out when she found out Bill retired, but decided to go to Florida and take the class with Bob Ross anyway. And she really just was amazed by his teaching method and him as a person, and talked him into going into business and creating a partnership where they would go about trying to sell classes of him teaching his method. So he left the Bill Alexander class and started a company, the Bob Ross Company, with her. Actually, the company was Bob and his wife Jane and Annette and her husband Walt. So it was like a 4-person business. And Jane had basically given Bob permission to go teach all these classes. He was allowed to take $1,000, but once he ran out of money, he agreed that he would come back. And so that's why he started perming his hair, because he felt like he could save money on haircuts, and that would make that $1,000 last a little bit longer. So they tried to sell these painting classes and were unsuccessful at first, but then realized that maybe if they tapped into Bill Alexander's market, where he was doing the painting shows and everything, thought maybe if they could tap into that, maybe those people would see in Bob what they had seen. So they ended up going to a public access basically and filmed what Bob was doing, and they got 1 season. The network decided not to bring them back, and they went to Muncie to do one of Bob's painting courses, and went to the local public broadcasting there and asked if they could do a commercial to promote their courses at the mall before and after the Bill Alexander program that they were showing. And so they allowed them to do that. They had a great turnout, and they came back to Muncie and asked if they could do a show, do a series there, and they agreed. And that's where Bob would do pretty much all of those 31 seasons of The Joy of Painting would be in Muncie, where we have been together and we have vlogged that studio. So people started to really love Bob Ross once he was on public broadcasting, and Bob would instigate them to call their local public broadcasting and tell them that they loved Bob Ross and they wanted it on, and that helped. But Bob really made most of his money in his career as a teacher, because he would film these shows. He would do 13 episodes per season. He would film those over like 3 or 4 days, but then the rest of the year they would make a book out of that season, like an instructional book that people could buy. So he would sell those, and he really loved to teach, so he would go teach. It wasn't just something to get people to watch TV. He really enjoyed being around people, and you're hard-pressed to find anybody that has a negative word to say about him as a person. You know, as far as anybody that ever met him or got to take a class with him, they all had the same thing. They loved him, and he knew that there were certain things that he could do to make this successful. Like if he talked to the audience one-on-one, he could win them over, and so that's what he did. And he also knew if he could wear a wardrobe that didn't date him years later, he could possibly have the show go on for who knows how long. And to this day, I mean, there's pretty much streaming services everywhere or somewhere that you can watch The Joy of Painting for free, even on YouTube. Bob became very successful and got to live out his dream. He even got a Corvette, and he got to do pretty much anything he wanted, teaching people all the time. But he ended up having to develop his own paint because Bill Alexander contacted him and said that they were selling so much paint they couldn't keep up with demand. And there were certain things that Bob liked about the paint that Bill Alexander used, but there were some things he wanted to change, so he used this as an opportunity to change those. He would he would make them 2-inch brushes instead of 2.5, and he would stick to certain paints and change the consistency, and he was a real stickler about making sure that those standards would stick. Unfortunately, Bob even before he ever was a painter, he had dealt with cancer before, and he had been in remission for many years, and a lot of people never knew that. And his wife Jane found out she had cancer in 1992, and within just a few weeks she passed away, and he fell into a major depression. He threw himself into his work, and then shortly found out that he had lymphoma and that his cancer had come back. And so he decided to basically try and amp everything up. He continued to want to make season after season while he could. He ended up, as you see, living until 1995, but he found out in 93, so he continued to make several seasons of The Joy of Painting, finishing at 31 seasons. He was working on a 32nd with the paintings, but he never was able to finish them or film the series. He had just become too weak, and it was sad because, you know, he had always loved to create and paint, and now he was at a point where pretty much everyone knew that he was gonna pass away. So he ended up developing a little like kids show that he helped do the pilot of, but he was so weak at the time that they had to come down to him and film it there. He was losing his hair, he was wearing a wig, he was just very thin, and sadly ended up spending much of the last days of his life in the hospital, and ended up marrying one of his nurses. Now, there are 2 documentaries about his life, and in one of them his son Steven says that Bob had been kind of feuding with the people that he was in business with, and that basically when it had been a partnership of 4, and when Jane passed away, Bob was now outvoted all the time, and he felt like his business partners were trying to take his name and likeness, and he didn't want them to. He wanted his son Steve, and he wanted his brother Jimmy to inherit it. And apparently, from what his son Steve says, it became pretty relentless, them trying to get him to sign over the rights to everything. And so to kind of help make sure that that didn't happen, he also married one of his nurses 2 months before he passed. But once he did pass, it became just crazy. Apparently Jimmy got served with a lawsuit by the business partners wanting the rights to Bob's name. They were trying to sue Bob's widow, the one that he had been with for the 2 months, for all of the paintbrushes and easel and anything that Bob would have touched or used. They wanted that, so reportedly, and in the end I think they got everything. Bob's son Steve said that by the time he went through and tried to do lawsuits, he found out that Jimmy had just given up and just signed everything away. And to this day, Steve Ross doesn't get anything that the Bob Ross Industries, or whatever it's technically known as, earns. It all goes to Bob's business partners. The one good thing to that, you know, I do have to say, because that's pretty heartbreaking. If it wasn't Bob's wishes, then that's really heartbreaking. But I have to say the one good thing is that they do make sure that Bob's show is always on TV, and that Bob's image is always out there, and he's never forgotten. So not too far from Bob, just a couple of spots down are his parents. There's Jack and Olive Ross. They divorced when Bob was a little boy. And then Olive had a son who was Jimmy. That was Bob's half brother. He was the one that ended up not fighting the court case. But 20 years after their divorce, they ended up getting back together, getting remarried. Fortunately, his dad Jack ended up passing away shortly thereafter. Now, Bob's son Steve never really had any interest in being on TV, but Bob himself would say Steve should have been, because Steve would have been perfect for it. And Bob even tried to set him up to take over the show at one point, and Steve just didn't want to do it. However, he would make many guest appearances painting pictures on Bob's show. Steve, to this day, still goes around teaching, and so you can still take classes from him and people that directly took classes from Bob. Even like the very first class Bob ever gave, one of the people from there still goes around, Dana Jester, and goes around giving classes. So really cool that Bob's memory still lives on so many years later after his death, and so many years after he basically went on television and just said, if you dream that you could do something, or if you want to do something, as long as you have the ambition to do it or the drive to try, you can do it. That's really amazing to pass on. Rest in peace, Bob Ross. Well, my friends, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you all for watching. Go watch some Joy of Painting with Bob Ross. And if you didn't see my last vlog, which was us going to the gallery, the Bob Ross galleries that he opened in 1993, a couple of years before his passing, go check that out. They have several pieces, actually the largest collection of Bob Ross on display anywhere. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.